I'd like to tell you about a very special piece that our Chancel Choir will be offering in worship on October 22nd, Commitment Sunday. It's called Lord, Thou Hast Been Our Refuge by the English composer Ralph Vaughan Williams. You may recognize Vaughan Williams' name from our United Methodist hymnal, as he's contributed to over 20 hymns, whether as a composer or arranger. Some of the popular hymns that we sing here at Glen include the tunes to All Creatures of Our God and King, Come Down, O Love Divine, and For All the Saints. Lord, Thou Hast Been Our Refuge takes its text from two different sources. One is the translation of Psalm 90 as found in the English Book of Common Prayer, and the other is Isaac Watts' paraphrase of that same psalm, known better to us as the first stanza of hymn 117, O God, our help in ages past. Here is a bit of the famous theologian Martin Luther's summary of Psalm 90. The 90th Psalm is a psalm of instruction in which Moses teaches the origin of death, namely sin, which, though known only by God and hidden from the world, is yet inborn in all from Adam to us. It shows that life here is not only short but also miserable, so that it may well be called a daily death. Nevertheless, the psalmist says that such a life is good, so that through it we would be driven to see God's grace and his help to deliver us from it all. The psalm ends with the prayer that God would show us his work, namely his deliverance from sin and death, that is, that he would send Christ. Regardless of whether you agree with Luther's theology and interpretation of Psalm 90, I encourage you to follow along with the words of the anthem on Sunday, and they will be printed in the bulletin. The imagery is quite powerful, especially when paired with Vaughan Williams' musical setting, and there are wonderful phrases like, before the mountains were brought forth, or ever the earth and the world were made, thou art God from everlasting and world without end. Musically, you will hear that there are two choirs in this piece. There's the main forces of the Chancel Choir, and then there's also a solo quartet. At the beginning, the main choir will introduce Vaughan Williams' original melody, which goes, Lord, Thou hast been our refuge from one generation to another. And immediately after that, the solo quartet enters, softly singing the Watts text to the tune that we know as St. Anne. O God, our help in ages past. But this tune is sung slow, even twice as slow as you might expect, perhaps to portray the timelessness of God. Vaughan Williams' musical language is what we would call modal, and by that I mean he tends to use only the notes found in particular musical modes, rather than using every single possible note found on a keyboard. Some of the hymns in our hymnal are also modal, like the ones that are based in the pentatonic scale, which only has 5 notes. So some pentatonic hymns that we sing, if you think of Land of Rest, sinners poor and needy, or Beach Spring, as listeners, we tend to associate modal music with folk songs. And, the pentatonic hymns I just played, a lot of those are found in the Sacred Heart, for example. And a lot of Vaughan Williams' music is based on English folk songs that he collected as a musicologist. I believe he collected over 800 separate tunes. So you will likely hear some of that modal harmonic language in this piece. This anthem takes us on a pretty extensive musical journey to match the progression of its text. We start from a relatively somber and soft place with just the two choirs that I mentioned. It isn't until the middle of the piece that the organ comes in, and there's a bit of build-up before the full choir returns in to sing Lord, Thou Hast Been Our Refuge much more confidently than at the beginning of the piece. And then later on, a trumpet plays the O God, our help in ages past tune as well, which is really moving in this context. And finally, the dams really break as the full musical forces of the choir and the organ are unleashed, and the trumpet continues to play the St. Anne tune. And the choir starts to sing these overlapping lines, which lead us to a triumphant final, O prosper thou our handiwork. Finally, I want to point out that this piece was written in 1921, not long after the end of the First World War. Vaughan Williams actually did serve in the war as a driver of ambulances, a lieutenant in the Royal Artillery, and later the director of music for the British First Army. Vaughan Williams was already in his 40s when the war broke out, so not only did he experience the emotional stress and trauma of losing many dear friends, but he also suffered from hearing damage and conceivably many other horrors of war. He didn't compose any music at all during the war, and it took him a while to get back into it. So this anthem, Lord, Thou Hast Been Our Refuge, was probably one of the first things that he composed after that hiatus. So that's another thing to think about. The faith one must have held to survive war and to be led to set Isaac Watts's poignant text, our shelter from the stormy blast and our eternal home. So that's a bit of background information about our gradual happening this Sunday, October 22nd. I really hope that knowing a bit of this background information will help enhance your experience as you listen to the piece this week, and I also hope that the choir's musical offering of these hallowed words and notes will enhance your own faith and participation in worship. Thank you for listening.